Welcome to Around the Empire. This is the show that takes you around the U.S. Empire. I'm your host, Dan Wright.
I'm your co-host, Joanne.
And on today's show, April 6, 2017, we speak with Jeffrey Carr, a cybersecurity expert, on the Russian hacking and attribution of such. Here is that interview.
Jeffrey Carr is an international cybersecurity consultant, an author and a researcher. He was the principal investigator in Project Grey Goose, an investigation into the Russian government's role in cyber attacks against the Georgian government during the 2008 war. He's also an author of a book, Inside Cyber Warfare, and he's worked with the multinational corporations in the defense, telecommunications, and media sectors. Hello, Jeff. Thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
I thought maybe we could start out with just a high-level series of events that led to the situation we're in right now, where we have the government basically saying that the Russians hacked servers and interfered with the elections, and they used a company called CrowdStrike. They based a lot of their analysis on that, at least the FBI did. And there are a lot of cybersecurity experts and technical experts who have some questions about the way they went about doing attribution. And especially recently, I mean, there have been doubts for a long time, but the media has started to notice them recently. And so if we could start out with sort of help our listeners understand the series of events that got us to where we are, and then, if you could share with us your analysis, which has been all over the media lately, which I was really glad to see, by the way, then we can move into some more detail.
Okay, so it's a complex issue because the intelligence community have focused more on the use of timing the stolen data and release of that data via WikiLeaks as a Russian operation, more so than the actual hacking. So, but this distinction is sort of missed by the general public, but it's certainly missed by people that have some skin in the game, so to speak, whether they are Democrats or Republicans. But I think from a cybersecurity perspective, it's important to distinguish between what is done via a network and what is done in the so-called physical world. So the claim that the Russian government, or specifically the one or two of Russia's intelligence agencies, hacked the DNC, that claim specifically has no evidence, absolutely zero technical evidence to support it. There is not a single technical artifact that has been connected to either of those agencies or to the Russian government in general. And anybody who says that they are, simply ask for that evidence, because it can't be produced. There is none. What is shown is a provenance of servers, or the use of certain types of malware, which in the past have been attributed to the Russian government. However, if you walk the chain of evidence backwards and ask at each sort of stop, where is the technical evidence that connects this particular act, this historical act, to the GRU, the FSB, or some other agency of the Russian government, then there won't be one there either. So it's really just a question of assumption, that historical assumptions that have been built one upon the other, going way back to whenever these campaigns first started, and we've sort of accepted these assumptions over time, and without any evidence to support them, they've become sort of part of this presumed factual lexicon that is just entirely an illusion. So the case of the DNC, the malware that was used, I think the name of the malware was X-Agent, has been, according to this company, CrowdStrike, and a few other companies as well, has been sourced to the Russian government under this sort of concept of exclusive use. Exclusive use is sort of like the flat Earth theory. It was before scientists or before human population accepted the fact that the world was round. We all just simply believed that it was flat. There is no evidence to support it. Similar with this idea of exclusive use. There's no evidence to support it. It's a purely hypothetical speculation on the part of cybersecurity people. They say that, a government has created some malware like the U.S. and Israel may have done with Stuxnet, creation of malware. And somehow we've been able to hang on to that malware exclusively, that nobody has been able to obtain the source code for it. Well, of course, we know that's not true.
Right.
Once Stuxnet was used against its target, that malware became available now to the victim. It became available to whoever the victim shared it with, any agencies that may have done the investigative work, any other hackers that came across it while exploring the compromised network. Once malware is deployed, you lose control over it. So the idea of exclusive use is just a fallacy. And that's one of the key tenets that companies like CrowdStrike use to claim attribution by a government. So that's where we are, where CrowdStrike did the forensic work on the DNC hack. They are the only ones that did. No other company or agency saw that server. And for whatever reason, the DNC denied the FBI access to it. CrowdStrike was responsible for the report that placed the blame on the GRU and the FSB. And then later in the year, they created a second report, which was almost entirely fabricated out of thin air, that claimed that the GRU attacked or created a piece of malware that attacked a Ukrainian artillery app. And that is what most recently some journalists have picked up on that, on the various fallacies in that story, Voice of America being one, the Daily Mail being another. And so now CrowdStrike has walked back some of its claims on the effectiveness of the malware, and they have stopped responding to journalists because they're clearly being caught in possibly the very worst, most irresponsible example of poor intelligence work that anybody has ever seen.
Yeah.
So,
why did they need the Ukrainian example? Were they trying to tie APT-28 to the Russian GRU? Is that what the benefit of that analysis was?
That's exactly it.
Right.
That's exactly it.
So they were saying this military application they said that the Ukrainian military used it for their artillery operations, and the Russians got a hold of it and put some malware into it and put it up on a military forum from which they claim or a lot of Ukrainian soldiers downloaded it and started using it out in the field. And then the Russians used that to geolocate pieces of artillery on the battlefield. And they were able to, obviously, that's a really sensitive piece of information because they blow up their artillery. And then they tacked on some British think tank data that says, oh, look at all of these artillery losses that the Ukrainian military suffered. And they sort of connected some dots there. By the way, not ever contacting, one, the developer of the app, who was the Ukrainian military officer himself, and two, the British think tank who published this data. So CrowdStrike, they never called the British think tank and said, hey, we're going to use your data. The Ukrainian military officer, I remember, he objected from day one, but no one bothered to contact him, neither CrowdStrike nor any of the journalists who reported this evidence, quote-unquote evidence. So obviously he was not happy because people were basically accusing him of assisting in killing his own fellow soldiers, or their artillery at the very least. I remember him saying, look, the soldiers get this software from me. It's not publicly available, and, this is a hoax. He was really upset about it. But everyone ignored it, which I couldn't understand at the time. And then, I guess, how long ago was that? 3 months ago?
Yeah, it was in December, I think.
So nothing happened for 3 months. And then, suddenly, Voice of America publish these things, and now everyone is questioning.
Actually, Voice of America did an initial report on this back shortly after it happened. They talked to the app's developer. They talked to some Ukrainian soldiers. They did a good report back in January, but it didn't get a lot of play.
Oh, right, January.
Yeah, and then they did a follow-up report just recently, and now they're doing another follow-up report. I mean, they're really hammering CrowdStrike over this, which they deserve, the company deserves. And yes, your recap was exactly right. That's exactly, it's astounding. The way the CrowdStrike thought they could just pull this off. You know, it's literally, I have friends and colleagues in the information security world that privately have said to me, you know, that they've never seen anything like this. This behavior by such a big company with former government employees that work there is so out of bounds. I mean, we've never seen anything like this before. CrowdStrike couldn't even produce a single example of an actual app that was compromised.
Oh my God!
They only had the fake app. That's it. They had no evidence that fake app was ever used by a Ukrainian soldier. They could not. They had no numbers in terms of how many legitimate apps were compromised or how many soldiers were using fake apps. Zero. They had none of that information. They had that one fake app. That was it. That's all they had. And they never contacted a developer. If they had, they would have learned that the actual application that he created had no internet connectivity. It did not share information. It didn't communicate back home. It didn't. The only thing it did was like a calculator. First iteration of this app, all it did was make calculations. It didn't collect any information. In fact, they didn't even use it on phones. Generally, they used it on tablets.
That's right. It didn't even connect to GPS.
No, nothing.
It had no connectivity.
At least not that first version. Also, the first version was only out there for a few months. Then the developer abandoned it in favor of a more advanced version. Again, CrowdStrike could have learned this had they bothered to talk to the developer, but they didn't. So they wound up extrapolating this incredible scenario that this app was widely used, that it transmitted precise GPS locations. It resulted in or contributed to 80% losses of the particular D-30 artillery piece that these soldiers were running in the field. This whole thing was, and so then we discovered that those numbers were grossly exaggerated, that the IISS, as you said, right, were never contacted by CrowdStrike. In fact, they said they disavowed any use of their data by CrowdStrike, that they did not accurately convey. The data does not suggest that. And the developer, of course, as you pointed out, has consistently denied that any of the apps were compromised. In fact, if you do use one of his apps, you have to contact him in order to get the key to make the app work.
So even if it was compromised, the soldiers get it from him.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
And then CrowdStrike, like many companies, have a habit of sharing the malware, right, for other researchers. So the sample that they loaded in VirusTotal, which is one of the ways that researchers share malware, turned out to be corrupted. So I'm not even sure how that happened.
So no one got to actually examine it because the file was corrupted?
Well, you couldn't load it. You couldn't load it into a phone, or it wouldn't work.
Oh, I see.
So they tried to share a file that you couldn't actually make work. I mean, one Crisis Lab, a Hungarian lab, managed to fix the file, but that still doesn't answer the question as to why would CrowdStrike load a corrupted file into VirusTotal. And Crisis Lab did issue, which CrowdStrike did not do, did issue a report on the functionality of the malware. And then we learned that there were a lot of unusual things about this malware. One, it contained a German language word, or why would the GRU write malware that contained a German language word? I don't know. It had fake Bank of America URLs in it, which are typically used for cybercrime, phishing. It's like you get a spear phishing email from Bank of America saying, oh, your account's been compromised. You need to click on this link to fix it or whatever. So it's possible that this malware was simply a piece of malware that was found on an old forum, that had absolutely zero connection to any Russian developer at all. The point that CrowdStrike tried to make was it was similar to, it was the mobile version of the malware that was used against the DNC, and because it was used in a military application in a war between Russia and Ukraine, then that cements the connection to the GRU. That since the GRU is running this type of operation against the Ukraine artillerymen, then that sort of is the nail in the coffin that the GRU hacked the DNC. That's how much importance CrowdStrike put on this. And mainstream media ran with it. PBS NewsHour, which I have uploaded the clips because it's so outrageous, had Dmitry Alperovich and Thomas Rid from King's College speaking about how this is just like quote-unquote DNA evidence. It's... Wow. The whole thing, this is why I really hate it when amateurs, and I use the word specifically because this was an amateurish job done by CrowdStrike, when either amateurs or irresponsible professionals try to play at the game of attribution at a nation-state level, you have real-world consequences. This damaged the morale of Ukrainian soldiers that are being killed on a daily basis because of the Russian aggression. It hurt the adoption of this app that this Ukrainian military officer created, to help his country. CrowdStrike's behavior in this case actually helped Russia.
Yeah, in the end it did.
Because it hurt the reputation of the app and the developer.
So doubt among the soldiers.
That's right. So doubt in their minds. And the mainstream media that ran with the story, like the Washington Post and PBS NewsHour and many other publications, there has not been word one about all of the questions that have now been raised, and even CrowdStrike's behavior, which the Daily Mail just revealed that they've refused to actually even do a public hearing now.
Yeah, they turned down. They won't testify now.
Besides walking back some of their, and they've stopped talking to journalists because they're clearly either embarrassed or ashamed or simply stonewalling, hoping it'll go away. Deservedly so. This was just an awful example of irresponsible analysis that the information security community should actually speak out against. I'm a little bit disappointed that so few people have actually taken a public stand.
Yeah, right.
Public stand against it.
We're talking about the Ukrainian issue that Voice of America brought up that has essentially kind of fallen apart, their claim. What level of, veracity would you give their other claim, which is that Russia was ultimately behind the DNC and Podesta hacks?
All right. Well, unfortunately, that's already that's no longer a theory. So it's no longer a theory simply because the U.S. government has determined that Russia was responsible. So it's sort of, you can argue the evidence, and I have there is no technical evidence that supports that theory. So that's just a fact. There is no technical evidence that points to the Russian GRU or FSB or any other agency of the Russian government, at least not that has been made public. So, and there's been no claim that there has been technical evidence that cements that has been classified, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So, and that's really the biggest problem, is that when the intelligence community makes a finding, it might be based on classified evidence that they can't reveal. So, you can't really argue against something that you can't see. And because this is a moot point, it's sort of a waste of energy, to continue to pursue it. However, I would say that, speaking purely from the evidence that is publicly available, the hacking part of it is not Russia. Whether or not Russia has control over WikiLeaks, I have no way of knowing that. Will WikiLeaks do what the Russian government asks? Maybe. I mean, who knows, right? Who knows? So My biggest issue here is that CrowdStrike has demonstrated that it's, and not just one time. CrowdStrike, Dmitry Alperovich has, even back when he was working for McAfee, was responsible for publishing reports that are just, so atrocious in terms of analytic rigor for addressing various biases. It's a long history. So from that perspective, sure, this awful Ukrainian military app finding that they created out of thin air does reflect, in my opinion, that on the quality of the evidence and analysis that they did on the DNC hack and on everything else that they do. That's what happens when you act irresponsibly. You have consequences.
Right. It's an interesting issue because, everybody sort of took that for granted, that CrowdStrike, which apparently, as I understand it, and maybe you can correct me, came to this conclusion that it was Russia in a day, that it was a very snap conclusion that the DNC hack was Russia. And it seems everyone's taking this for granted and then building these big cases of, chain reactions and long Twitter threads that are extremely annoying about Russian influence, Russia this, Russia that. But CrowdStrike, it seems to be the source of it, and the 17 intelligence agencies or whatever who seem to all find a consensus. It's not clear that there really is a consensus based on what I'm hearing. It seems like they all kind of are going along with the program, and the genesis is this CrowdStrike report that was kind of flippantly done, which is having real-world consequences because now we're in the middle of quote-unquote Russiagate, and nobody can actually demonstrate how this happened.
Yes, and there's sort of an echo chamber, as you pointed out on social media, and what makes matters worse is that it's repeated by people that should know better. Former Russian ambassadors, one in particular, has been very vocal about how there's no question that it was the Russian government, when in fact there's a million questions about why it may not be the Russian government. Or this person, Thomas Rid, from this professor at King's College London, who has been basically a mouthpiece for CrowdStrike. He himself doesn't have any background in forensics work, data forensics, or incident response. He simply speaks with people who worked for CrowdStrike or worked for other information security companies, and then repeats, what he hears, and makes money, writing books about it. So you have a lot of people that are sort of climbing on that bandwagon and either doing it for gain, for profit, or for other unknown reasons, and they'll do it because it's the popular thing to do, and they become just part of this echo chamber that repeats fiction until pretty soon it becomes presumed fact.
And what's interesting, I think, and you're an expert in the field, is there are so few experts in this field. And what I see a lot from sort of the DC pundit class and a lot of journalists who, by the way, I think are well-intentioned, is they really don't know anything about this subject matter. So they're kind of intimidated, and they also don't want to appear, particularly for DC journalists, unsavvy, like they don't know. So it's very comfortable for them to repeat things that quote-unquote experts say because they don't have any subject matter expertise. So I feel like that is really driving a lot of this, is that unlike, for example, claims about foreign policy relationships where this person doesn't like, that's more personal, human. They might be more critical because they're like, no, I think I kind of understand how that works. So few people, I think, in the media have a basic comprehension of cybersecurity that they're intimidated and they kind of just nod and say, well, a company said this. They know what they're talking about. They must know what they're talking about. Do you see that sort of expert submission type dynamic?
Yeah, a couple of things. I also wanted to point out, when you hear, and I see this a lot, when you hear or read 17 agencies all agreed, right? That's utter bullshit. That never happens. You never get two agencies to agree. Everybody thinks that they've got a better chain of evidence, a better analysis. Agencies don't agree. They come to a consensus through the ODNI. And certainly 17 agencies did not look at this case Coast Guard Intelligence Service did not look at the BNC hack. I promise. You know, as a former Coast Guardsman, I promise that they did not bother looking at this because they had more important things to do. So so that's one thing. It was not 17 agencies. It was the ODNI coming to a finding. It took the FBI a long time to get behind it. Same with NSA, CIA. They all had their various issues. But the journalists in general do not understand the field. Policymakers certainly, congressmen absolutely do not understand the field. And information security professionals, depending on the individual, will either acknowledge that there's a lot here that we don't know or cannot determine technically, or they'll claim that while it's hard, we by we meaning our company, can do it. And so you'll see that a lot. You'll see, yes, attribution is hard, attribution can be faked, but for whatever strange reason, they're able to do it, every time. So, so it's a real quagmire, and the scariest part to me, as I've written and said many times, is because this attribution is so uncertain, and because you have people that think that it is not, this can easily lead to a war or some type of conflict between two nation states, one of whom is probably completely innocent and has been set up by whomever chooses to plant the evidence that we're all just going to bite down on because of the moment that we see a Cyrillic character or a Chinese character.
And that comes after even now people are holding on to it, but that comes after, and I'm not saying this is proof positive or any kind of false flag stuff. I think there's no evidence for that, but WikiLeaks published that, which it kind of goes without saying that, the CIA has false attribution tools. I imagine that's been out forever. I think. False attribution is part of spycraft since the beginning of time. So, all these nation-state actors who have big budgets, including the U.S., have tools for false attribution. So we don't even have the evidence, let alone the fact that a lot of this evidence, in theory at least, could be manipulated. Yeah,
and it's not hard to do. It's because companies like CrowdStrike have a tendency to rush their analysis, and then because really their papers they're marketing papers, really. They're not. CrowdStrike is a for-profit company, just like other cybersecurity companies. So their so-called intelligence reports, these are basically marketing papers. Well, if they can place the blame on a foreign government, then they'll get press coverage, and that's worth a lot of money, depending on the press coverage. But if you can get a story in the New York Times, that could be worth millions of dollars because it'll make news around the world for your company. So the inclination is to rush into these attribution reports for marketing reasons. But unfortunately, those reports are picked up by journalists who have no ability to discern whether they're accurate or not. They're read by policymakers who have no technical background to understand the problems, and the community itself is either hyping the value, their ability to do attribution, or they're skeptical about it. And so there's not even any agreement within its own community. It's just it's just sort of a potential. There's a huge potential for disaster by anyone that with a little bit of knowledge that can plant some Russian-made malware or some Chinese-made malware in the right place and cause some mayhem.
What's interesting about false attribution, which when you even bring this up, people scream at you that you're a conspiracy theorist, is actually the people who have been claiming that the Russians were involved are actually accusing the Guccifer 2.0 account of using false attribution because it attempted, they claim, to make it Romanian when it's really Russian. So even the mainstream, if you want to call it mainstream theory, involves a claim of false attribution, right?
Right. Yeah, in a way. That's true. So by intelligence agencies, the NSA, we know because thanks to, can't think of the name, the group that published all of those documents.
The shadow brokers?
Yeah, shadow brokers. So now we know that the NSA frequently uses servers in other countries. They're not going to launch attacks from American-based servers, and that's just common sense.
Right.
You would think that would be the very first thing that they teach you in intelligence school is don't run an attack from your desktop in Langley or Fort Meade, right?
Right.
But that's exactly what we believe the Russian government does. And you can say, and they say it with a straight face, it's just remarkable that we consider our adversaries so stupid and then at the same time call them sophisticated when our own intelligence services would never ever do such a thing.
Good that you bring up the danger of it, because we already have lawmakers saying that this was an act of war. And we also have NATO and actually Hillary Clinton saying that cyber attacks should be answered with potentially conventional military response. So this is serious business when
right.
you have people talking about how Russia has started a war with us and the kind of military response that could result should someone want to go down that path. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I know we're out of time. Thanks for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate it and enjoyed it. And love to talk to you again sometime.
Sure thing. Well, thanks for the invitation. I enjoyed it as well, and best of luck.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And that's our show. I want to thank you for listening, and a special thank you to cybersecurity expert Jeffrey Carr. Follow him at Twitter at Jeffrey Carr, or on Medium at Jeffrey Carr. Or check out his business website, 20kleague.com. If you'd like to support the show for as little as $5 a month, we appreciate it. Patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire. If you'd like to make a one-time donation, Dan at Shatterproof.com on PayPal. Questions, comments, want to yell at me? Dan at Shatterproof.com. And if you want to see more of my and Joanne's work, Shatterproof.com. Thanks. See you next time.
See ya.